Virgin Most Powerful Radio, sharing the gospel with clarity and charity.
And now, Virgin Most Powerful Radio is pleased to present Hands-On Apologetics with renowned Catholic author and apologist, Gary Michuta.
And welcome, everybody, to Hands-On Apologetics. You have entered into Virgin Most Powerful's Apologetics Dojo, and it's great to be with you today. Yes, I am Gary Michuta, your host and sensei for this hour, and as always, we dive into this adventure that we engage in, where we learn how to explain, defend the faith with clarity, charity, and confidence. And actually, you know, in many different ways, this program brings you some cutting-edge ideas in terms of explaining, defending the faith. And that's important for us Catholics, to be able to give good, solid explanations for the hope that's in us. And especially, you know, it's not unusual, especially on social media, to see people exploit some of the things going around us to try to undermine people's faith and love in Christ. In fact, just surfing the web, you know, you see a lot of these prominent atheists who will bring up the coronavirus and try to use the old, argument from evil to undermine belief in God. And unfortunately, they're very popular. But, you know, does their argument hold together? Is there some truth? What is false? Does the argument from evil cut both ways? And actually, to help us kind of work through that, we're going to have a master apologist and also fitness expert, Pat Flynn, on the show. As you know, Pat was once an atheist, and he studied his way into theism and ultimately into the Catholic Church. So he's come to grips with all these different issues. And we're going to talk about, do atheists have a point when it comes to God and the coronavirus? So Pat's going to give us a kind of different take on the problem of evil. I actually look forward to hearing him explain this, because there's many different sides to that issue, and I don't think all the sides are often presented in popular presentation. So we're going to do that on the other side of the break. We also have our Finding the Fallacy, which today is the post-Hoc Ergo Propter Hoc, and for those Latinists, you already know what that is. For those who don't know Latin, it is after this, therefore because of this. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. We also meet an early church father. Today's early church father is Zechary of Mitylene. Not exactly a household name. Probably, I don't know if anybody out there would have a devotion to this particular Zechary, but nevertheless, we're going to talk about him, and also, we're going to have Pat Flynn. So it's going to be a great show. I really look forward to this. And I want to thank everybody for tuning in. So let me give my shout-outs that I do every show to those watching on our social media section of the dojo. Welcome, folks, on Facebook and YouTube. Hello. Oh, thank you, Beth. Nice emoji explosion there. And also, Ricky, saw that, and all the rest of you. Thank you. I really appreciate it. Also, I want to welcome all of you listening on live radio around this great nation of ours, and also via podcast. Via the internet. And so it's great. We have a lot of international listeners, a lot of people all around the United States, and, of course, on social media as well. So, it's kind of a cool family. You know, the dojo is a rather large dojo indeed. And the more the merrier, as far as I'm concerned. So thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Also, by the way, you know, every show I kind of point this out, that many of us are stationed in place. We need to do apologetics in place. This is a great opportunity for you to do apologetics just in social media, you know. And one of the ways you can do that is tell people about Virgin Most Powerful Radio and about Hands-On Apologetics. Please, if you get a chance, I know many of you already have, so I'd like to thank all of you in advance for subscribing to the Hands-On Apologetics channel on YouTube, also for liking, subscribing, doing all that stuff that you guys do. We really appreciate it. because, what it is it increases our effectiveness and enables us to bring, great guests like Pat Flynn, to the public forum. So anyway, thank you all. By the way, if you have any questions for Pat, give us a call toll free at 888-526-2151. That is 888-526-2151. Or you can always email us your questions. Perhaps you're too shy at questions@handsonapologetics.com. That is the official dojo address. The questions@handsonapologetics.com. I do receive all the emails, and I try to do my best to answer them. And I do answer them. Just often it might take a little while. So if you haven't heard from me, please, send a reminder email. That's perfectly A-OK with me. All right, so why don't we jump into our informal fallacy segment, where we look at all these wrong ways of arguing. And today's finding the fallacy is it oldie but goodie, or a baddie maybe, since it's a fallacy. It's the post hoc ergo propter hoc fallacy. And that's Latin for after this, therefore because of this. And it's an informal fallacy that states, since event Y follows event X, then Y must have been the cause of event X. And this is often shortened for the post hoc fallacy, by the way, if you don't want to use the entire Latin phrase. By the way, this is a fallacy which many superstitions come from. If you ever wondered, how did we ever get this idea that if a black cat crosses your path, you have bad luck for the day, or find a penny, pick it up, all the day you have good luck? Those came through the post hoc ergo propter hoc. People would find a penny, they'd pick it up, they'd have a great day afterwards. So they reasoned that since a great day followed their discovery of a penny, that it must have been the cause of their great day. Or, and you could plug it into all these other, weird superstitions out there. So this is one of those superstition generating fallacies, I guess you could call it. And the thing is, we're trained to learn that the effect usually comes after the cause. And so, whenever we see an effect, we just look at something that happens before and assume that's the cause. Many times it's true, but not always true, just like I said with the penny and having a great day. There is no causal connection between the two. So that's something to keep in mind. In fact, it's interesting that this fallacy happens to fall on our early church father for today, Zechary of Mitylene, because one of his disputations is that the world is not co-eternal with God, and he actually makes a mistake there where he says that effects always follow the cause. And that's not really true. Sometimes effects are simultaneous with the cause. So anyway, that is our not early church father. That will be the early church father. This is our finding the fallacy, which is the post hoc ergo propter hoc. So now that I already spoiled the surprise with the early church father, why don't we talk about him, shall we? Zechary of Mitylene died sometime before A.D. 553. He's also known as Zechary Scholasticus, or Zechary the Rhetor. He was born in a port city of Gaza, and he's perhaps the brother of the sophist Procopius of Gaza. About the year 485 A.D., Zechary was a student at Alexandria, and in the autumn of 487, he began his legal studies in what is modern-day Beirut. In about 492 A.D., he settled in Constantinople, where his pursuit of the legal profession earned him the title of Scholasticus and Rhetor. So, by the way, if you ever run across an early church father who is called somebody Scholasticus, that's not their last name. It's a title. It means they're usually a lawyer or a rhetorician. So just, there's a little life hack for those who love digging into early church fathers. In his early years, Zechary was a Monophysite and a friend and admirer of Severus of Antioch, whose biography he wrote. By the way, what is a Monophysite? Well, if you listen to this program, we're always talking about the Monothelites and the Monophysites. The Monophysite is a heresy where they believe that the two natures of Christ were so united that they actually mix together. And they end up basically that Jesus has a third kind of nature that's part divine, part human. Okay, so that's the monophysite. You could always remember that because in the middle of the word, after mono, it says phy, like physics, physical. So that's a good little memory hack there. So he was a monophysite admirer of Severus of Antioch, and he wrote a biography. After the year 492, there was a great lacuna in our knowledge of this particular early church father, but in 536, we find him again present at the synod at Constantinople as Metropolitan Bishop of Mitylene on the island of Lesbos. He is now Chalcedonian. In other words, he kind of gotten the Monophysite heresy kind of straightened out. And he subscribes to the condemnation of his once greatly admired friend Severus of Antioch, and along with other Monophysites as well. So somewhere during that lacuna, between 492 and 536, something happens in his life where he leaves the Monophysite point of view and becomes orthodox on the point. So we don't know what it is, but thanks be to God that it happened. Zechary died prior to the Second Council, which would be the Fifth Ecumenical Council of Constantinople in 553 AD. And that is our early church father for today, who is Zechary of Mitylene. By the way, the only writing we have, I believe, is his disputation that the world is not co-eternal with God. It's written as a dialogue between a Christian and one Ammonius. Let's see, it was written sometime between the year AD 487 and AD 492. So that's our early church father, Zechary of Mitylene. Coming up next, we're going to be talking with Master Apologist Pat Flynn, and we're going to be tackling the problem of evil and, both sides of that equation in a few moments. Stay tuned, everybody. You're listening to Hands On Apologetics. We will be right back.
Hebrews 11:3 says, "By faith we come to understand." According to St. Augustine, understanding is the reward of faith. Therefore, seek not to understand that you may believe, but believe that you may understand. May God grant us a strong living faith in Him and His divine plan of salvation, and help us to believe so that we may understand.
Did you know my mom's gonna have a baby?
She is? Will it be a boy? Or will it be a girl?
We don't know yet, but we heard the heartbeat and my dad said this is gonna be someone very special.
You mean like being a president? Or maybe a doctor?
Well, probably maybe like a singer or dancer, I think.
Hello, my name is Mary Ann Koharski. I'm the director of Pro-Life Across America. We know that every baby is a miracle and has the potential to do great things. If you know someone who is pregnant or in need of alternatives or assistance, or would like to support the work of Pro-Life Across America, please call 1-800-366-7773 or visit our website at prolifeacrossamerica.org. Pro-Life Across America is non-political and totally educational.
Pro-Life Across America, the Billboard people.
This is Terry Barber. I want to thank you for your support here at Virgin Most Powerful Radio. Here's an easy way to do it. If you're going to sell or buy a house, call Real Estate for Life, 877-543-3871, because they're going to get you a Christ-centered agent to purchase your home or to sell your home. And at the close of escrow, a portion of his commission goes right back to Virgin Most Powerful Radio. Call 877-543-3871. Thank you so much for your support.
Now, back to Hands On Apologetics with Gary Machuda. If you'd like to join the conversation, call 888-526-2727. 2151. Here's Gary.
And welcome back, everybody, Hands on Apologetics. Well, we're in the grips of this COVID-19 virus, and there's many atheists on popular media that have exploited it, as usual, using the argument from evil and the problem of evil. And, are they right? Are they wrong? How could we answer it? What would be a good way to tackle this problem? Well, with us, we have our good friend, Pat Flynn. Pat Flynn, of course, is the host of the Pat Flynn Show, which covers everything from fitness to mental health to business and writing, philosophy, and theology. He's the best-selling author, philosopher, fitness coach, musician, entrepreneur, and he expounds upon his theory of generalism, a theory applicable to each and every one of us. And you can check out all the great stuff he does at chroniclesofstrength.com. And Pat Flynn, welcome to Hands on Apologetics.
Gary, it is always a pleasure to be with you. Thanks again for inviting me on. It's a joy.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I love having you on the show because, it's one thing to study a subject while never being, part of it. Like you could study Lutheranism, but you never were a Lutheran, or Presbyterian, and you never were a Presbyterian, but you never really get a really good feel for what you're critiquing. But, with you, when you were an atheist, you really dug into it and ultimately made it, out of atheism to theism and ultimately to the Catholic Church. So, I learn a lot every time you're on the show because you kind of showed, how a non-believer would approach things and also the problems from within that system.
Well, I appreciate that. And I think there's something of, God's providence there. Well, I mean, of course, I have to accept that now as a Catholic, right? And
right.
But what I've realized is I've been able to relate to people who are struggling with belief, and I've been able to form conversations with them in a way that I can say, hey, look, I get it. I had those same struggles myself, and that's what led to my skepticism. But here's a few things that were really helpful to me. And I think just when part of this is the manner of apologetics, the relational aspect. When people just feel like they can be related to, it facilitates such a more productive type of conversation than what you've hinted at, these sort of internet meme wars, where one side puts up their meme for why God exists and others. And, that's has anybody ever been converted or changed their mind because of a meme? I honestly have no idea. But I can say, at least from my experience, having genuine conversations with people who are genuinely curious, but, have a healthy skepticism, I found I've been able, because of sharing my experience, been able to have some really productive conversations. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one thing to speak to somebody who has been where you're at and say, hey, did you ever think about this? That's so different from someone who's totally foreign and outside throwing out slogans or, canned arguments. I think you're absolutely right. It's just like bings off their intellectual armor. But if you could just come and say, hey, I was where you were. I believe the same things you do. And, but then I noticed this. That's where you come alongside them. That is so powerful.
Yeah, and I also just know I think the best arguments and the best objections against God. I've studied them. I know the best on the other side, and I think they can be overcome. I do. Like, I know Mackey's objections and Oppie's objections and the best and the brightest of the atheists, not just these sort of internet sloganeers. So often when I'm having conversations with people, they'll have a sort of general objection. I'll be like, well, hold on. Here's a stronger way of putting it, right? So, and that's what I always admired about Aquinas, is he was the master of this. You hear the term now called steel manning, right? So you go to Aquinas and you think you have an objection, and he states that objection so much more forcefully than you had it in your mind, or even skeptics have. And you're like, oh my gosh, how is he ever going to overcome this? But there's value in that approach, right? Because if you can present the opposite argument as strong as possible and still overcome it, that says something. And that can actually inspire a lot of confidence in people. And I found that because that was so valuable for me, especially when engaging with people like Aquinas, I want to try and do that. I want to try and engage in this sort of steel manning project and say, okay, I hear this objection, but actually I think we can make it even a little bit stronger. And then let's see what we can do about it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that is very disarming. So let's move to our topic then. The problem of evil, this is being exploited on the web, and it's always been exploited. The problem of evil is probably, I don't know if you agree with me, but do you think it's one of the best weapons against theism?
Yes and no. I think I don't think it's the best philosophical objection, but I think it's the best emotional.
Yeah.
I think it's the best emotional objection. I think it has the most influence. I think there's other trickier objections that require a little bit more thought to work your way through as kind of when you're deep in the weeds of the philosophy of theism. But you never almost see those on a popular level. So yeah, I would say on a popular level, what has the most influence would be the problem of evil. I would certainly agree with that. Yeah,
that's a great distinction too, especially when you're in the midst of a lot of suffering, like with the COVID, epidemic. People are losing loved ones, and it's people could really exploit that the struggle that people are going through. Just coping with loss of life and so on. To say, hey, this is really good proof that God doesn't exist, because how could a good God possibly have caused something like this?
Right, and I think the first thing we want to say here is, well, what's new? What's new about this?
Yeah.
And even though it might seem like an opportunity to try and exploit the problem of evil was perennial. The fact that suffering exists did not come along with the coronavirus. The fact that diseases existed did not come along with the coronavirus. Like, this is not this is a novel situation, to be sure, but it's a novel situation of a much more general kind. So in one sense, it's like, well, okay, has this really added anything to the conversation aside a bunch of these meme wars? And I can't think of a single way that it has.
That's a really good point. Yeah, even the new atheism, it really took off after 9/11. So it was kind of, they used that emotional punch to make their way into prominence in America.
And I think that's important to note, right? Because I think it speaks to what I just said. Is that predominantly, I think the reason that this type of argument has the influence it does is because of great emotional weight. And it would make sense then, if that's the case, that if you tied it into a very emotional event that's close to people, it may have more force. Yeah. Whereas philosophically, in the abstract, it's irrelevant, right?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we deal with stuff like this? Like, where do you go to if someone?
Yeah, so let me just give a sketch of a couple different responses, and I'm gonna talk about something, a response that I've been working on publishing myself that I think is in some ways novel, but builds off of some work of a friend of mine at Villanova named Stephen A. Pierce. I want to give him some credit. There's a couple ways to respond to the problem of evil. One is just to assume what's called a sort of general skeptical theism, right? And when we look at the problem of evil, what are we really saying here? Well, the way that it's typically formulated is that, if God is all powerful, he can create any world he wants. And if God is all good, he would create a world without any suffering or evil in it. But obviously, I don't think anybody would deny the world is suffused with suffering, and not just the coronavirus, right? The list goes on and on and on. So what seems to follow from that is that we have a challenge here. And maybe that challenge is that God still exists, but he's just really incompetent, right? Maybe that's the case, right? It wouldn't even necessarily get you atheism, but it would be a serious issue for the God of classical theism and Christianity. So we do have to take it seriously there. Like, maybe you have some sort of deistic Platonic demiurge or something who is somehow limited in power or limited in goodness. And okay, so we've kind of brought it down to that. But I don't think we have to concede that at all, because I think both of the steps in that argument can be challenged. And one way is to just, say, hey, okay, God is all powerful, but let's be clear about what omnipotence means. Omnipotence doesn't mean that we can create nonsense or contradictions. If God wants to create a certain type of world with a certain type of creature, there might be metaphysical and logical design constraints to that world. And this is your classic free will type of defense. And I think that's worth pursuing. I think there's a lot of value in that. That's not the approach I want to take in this episode, but I just want to show people that there's options here, right? And the general idea there is not just that if God wants to make people free, he can't obviously determine them to act a certain way. But there also would have to be, because somebody like Mackey would say, okay, but, people could be free and still choose the right thing. I think what we would want to say in response to that is there has to be significant moral room as well in order to bring about certain types of goods that seem really good, things like compassion and courage and justice and self-sacrifice. So it's not just the ability to choose otherwise, but it seems like we would need a significant amount of moral turf or moral playing field, right? So that's one way to look at it. The other way, and this is more of Aquinas' way, is to challenge that second step in the argument and say, and not even really talk about free will, but just say God has morally sufficient reasons, right? And what Aquinas is doing is he's drawing out a hidden assumption in the problem of evil. And that hidden assumption is from the atheist thinking that God could not or does not have morally sufficient reasons for allowing evil and suffering to exist. And that seems like the most obvious weak point in this type of argument. And I think it's been pretty well agreed upon at this point that the logical problem of evil doesn't work. It's pretty much in the philosophical dustbin. Because in order to justify that hidden assumption, you would effectively have to be omniscient, right? You would have to be God. You would have to know all the relevant facts of the situation to be able to determine whether or not God had morally sufficient reasons to allow suffering or evil in the world. So that's kind of, that isn't going to be emotionally satisfying to a lot of people, but it's enough to grind the objection from evil, the logical problem of evil, to a halt. And philosophically, I think that's satisfying. That's what we want to do, right? We've provided a response and we've halted the objection. So I think it is important to understand that how you deal with this philosophically is probably very different than how you deal with it emotionally. But I think it is equally important to see that it can be dealt with philosophically.
You're right.
So that is a general approach. I have a couple other approaches though, but I'd be curious to get your thoughts on everything so far.
Yeah, well, we only have maybe a minute left, so that's actually a great place to leave it there. But yeah, so in a sense, what the non-believer is saying or assuming is that since I can't find any rational, grounded reason why this world is this particular way, then obviously God doesn't have one, and therefore the problem of evil stands.
Yeah, so it comes down to this. Because I can't see the explanation, I conclude that I see that there is no explanation. And that's a completely invalid inference, right? Just because you can't see the explanation doesn't mean that you see that there is no explanation.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, I hear the music coming up, so that's perfect. We're chatting with Master Apologist Pat Flynn and problem of evil, in this environment of apologetics in place, I guess you could say. And more to come on the other side of the break. You're listening to Hands On Apologetics.
Attention VMPR listeners. We've talked at length about the attack on our youth through popular culture media, but what if I told you there was someone trying to make a difference? The newest novel, Britfield and the Lost Crown, by C.R. Stewart, is reaching schools across America and sharing Christian morals alongside great storytelling. What if I told you that this mission needs your help? To reach more children, Britfield and the Lost Crown need funding for their ongoing book tour. If you're interested in making a difference, if you're interested in buying the book, or are curious and want more information, go to BritfieldInstitute.org. That's BRITFIELD Institute.org. Or email media@britfield.com. Help open up the world of Britfield and the Lost Crown to people everywhere.
Finding the right doctor for your obstetric and gynecological needs can be difficult. Do you want a doctor with impeccable references and ethical practices? One who is trustworthy and well-researched? Dr. Aceta is that doctor. As a faithful Catholic in the Kern County community, Dr. Aceta provides expert care guided by his Catholic teachings, focusing on the patient's needs according to his own specialty. Call Dr. Aceta for all your obstetrics and gynecological needs at 661-595-5617. Again, 661-595-5617 for quality care without compromise.
Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show. And they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow, that's 80%. realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE-US1.
Now, back to Hands-On Apologetics with Gary Machuda. If you'd like to join the conversation, call 888-526-2151. Here's Gary.
And welcome back, everybody. We are chatting with Master Apologist Pat Flynn of the Pat Flynn Show, and also you can check out all his great stuff at chroniclesofstrength.com. That's all one word, chroniclesofstrength.com. Lots of great material out there, not only apologetics and theology, but especially fitness and other types of deals. And we're talking about the problem of evil. And Pat, right before the break, you kind of shown how at least the intellectual or logical case for the problem of evil is really kind of a non-starter. Because I think if you end up with this, if you end up saying, since I don't see that there's any coherent or logical reason for the world being like it is, therefore it isn't, I think that should be on the list of famous last words,
I agree. And I think it also comes down to degree of expectation. What degree of expectation should we have that we think we would see these explanations? And I don't think we should have any confidence in that at all. In fact, it seems like if God exists, I might be able to know the truth about some things like God's existence. But being a finite, limited creature in relation to an omnipotent, omniscient being, I would just expect that there are just going to be so many things, so many mysteries, so many problems that I just either do not or maybe in principle cannot have the answer to. So I should expect there to be mysteries and even mysterious evils given God's existence. Like that doesn't seem like that would be a surprising thing. And Gary, if you don't mind, I want to push it a little bit harder because I think we can push back against the problem of evil often more aggressively than a lot of people do. And I want to make a stronger claim. I want to claim that the problem of evil can't even be coherently formulated unless you've already conceded certain points that concede God's existence. So let me say that another way, that you can't even get the problem of evil off the ground until you already admitted that God exists, even just implicitly. And, what do I mean by that? Well, in one sense, if you just the fact that evil exists at all, and based on degree of expectation of what I would expect, and this is something my friend Josh Rasmussen, a point that he makes in his response to the problem of evil, is that if atheism were true, if naturalism were true, I wouldn't expect evil at all, full stop, period, because I wouldn't expect a contingent world at all. I wouldn't expect conscious beings at all. So the whole experience of suffering and evil is wrapped up in all these other things that ultimately, in order to be explained, require God's existence to explain them. Contingency, the hard problem of consciousness, an objective moral realm where we can even make moral value assessments, all of these to even get them off the ground so we can formulate a problem of evil only makes sense on a theistic worldview. They aren't the type of thing that you would expect if naturalism is true, but they're just the types of thing you would expect if theism were true. So that's one way I think I like to go at it. And we can unpack that a little bit, but I have another approach as well.
Yeah, so in other words, the whole problem of evil presupposes the existence of God. And so if God doesn't exist, then why are you posing this problem to me?
Yeah, right. So what does that effectively do if that's correct? And I think it is correct. Well, what it does is it reduces the problem of evil from a philosophical objection to a theological mystery or a theological question. And that, to me, is the right category for the problem of evil. It's overcome as a philosophical objection, and that there's there's a privileging that should be given toward a theistic worldview for all the various reasons that I've just described, that we need theism to make sense of contingency, of consciousness, of an objective moral realm. And we need those things to make sense of a formulation of the problem of evil itself. Now, what does that do? Well, it shows that there is the God of classical theism, and there is still suffering and evil. So then it reduces it from a philosophical problem or objection to a theological question or mystery. Still an important theological question and mystery, but it's no longer, I think, a legitimate objection to God's existence.
Yeah. So in conversation, what would you do? Would you call out, say, well, why do you say as an atheist that there is evil? I mean, how could you work that?
It's always a case-by-case basis. So you can start in that sense. You can say, can we even really make sense of the problem of evil unless we're already committed to some realm of the objective good, right? Of some transcendent standard of what the good is. And it seems like as soon as we admit that, we've already given up the argument effectively. And that can actually really cause people to reflect. Now, sometimes they might dig their heels in and deny the objectivity of moral values and duties, but then you can just kind of shrug your shoulders at and be like, what's the problem then? Because there's not really a problem, because nothing is effectively a problem if there is no objective moral standard, right? If there's if morality is just an illusion, then what are we even talking about? Another approach I like, and something I've been working on, and we can test it out here on your radio show, Gary.
Okay.
Is something to do with a principle of explicability, and this is something I've noticed is really interesting. And what I want to say is that there is great inconsistency among atheists, even atheist intellectuals who are seriously engaged in this question, and that they're arbitrary in when explicability matters and when it doesn't, right? And here's what I mean by that, because the problem of evil ultimately comes down to this, that if you have an all-good, all-loving, all-powerful God, evil and suffering is inexplicable. You can't make sense of it, right? So that's the problem. It becomes it's an inexplicable datum. Now, of course, if what we've already said before is true, that God could have morally sufficient reasons, then it's not really an inexplicable datum. But that's their charge anyways. And here's what I want to say to that, right? Suddenly, explicability is important when it comes to evil. But for whatever reason, you don't think explicability is important when it comes to contingency or the hard problem of consciousness, right? So, and what do I mean by this? Well, when we have these classical theistic arguments for God, like the contingency argument, that anything contingent is dependent, it's pointing to some explanation beyond itself to explain why it exists in just a limited, finite way that it does. In order to explain contingency, in order to not violate a general, principle of explicability or a principle of sufficient reason, we have to get to some infinite and perfect being, really the God of classical theism. But the traditional atheistic bailout from that argument is just to deny that explicability matters. They bail out through the window of brute facts, right? They say, look, we don't need to explain everything. We can just get to some contingent state of affairs, some fundamental physical simple, and it's just there, right? It's no explanation needed, as somebody like Bertrand Russell would assert, because not everything needs an explanation, right? Now, isn't that interesting? Isn't that curious? Because if everything doesn't need an explanation there, then what's the problem if evil doesn't have an explanation, right? So you can't be so inconsistent and arbitrary when you're deciding when explicability matters or when it doesn't. And what I want to say is if you're going to push the problem of evil, you are at least implicitly committed to some general principle of explicability. I would even argue some form of the principle of sufficient reason. But as soon as you make that commitment, all the traditional arguments for God, at least the best ones like contingency, go straight through. So we're already back at God's existence, because the logical connections between contingency and necessity, between finitude and an infinite perfect being, are far more obvious and far tighter than any of the arguments from evil against God's existence. So as soon as you commit yourself to the idea that explicability matters, you should, again, privilege God's existence based on explicability, and that, again, would reduce the problem of evil to a theological mystery. The problem dissolves. If you deny that explicability matters, then it's not a problem. Not everything needs an explanation. So the argument loses all of its force.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, in other words, if you're, the atheists would say, in order to avoid the existence of God, there are just some things that are brute facts that have no explanation whatsoever. However, the problem of evil does demand explanation. And basically all you're saying is that it's kind of an ad hoc argument. It's like when it works in your favor, then you go with inexplicability, and when it seems to favor your opinion, explanations demand it's necessary.
I think it's evidence of resistance and motivated reasoning. I really do, ultimately. And yes, because even if the atheist says, okay, the logical problem of evil doesn't work, so let's switch to an evidential problem of evil. It's just improbable that there's a good explanation. But you're still committed to a principle of explicability in trying to push these arguments through. But as soon as you admit that, then you should not be bailing out of arguments from contingency, arguments from change, arguments from composition, right? That all get you back to this God of classical theism. Because again, the logical clarity of the connections from those arguments is far tighter and far more obvious than any type of obscure probability assessment from evil, where it's just not clear that God couldn't have morally sufficient reasons. But then if that's the case, right, okay, I assume some general principle of explanation, some modest version of the principle of sufficient reason or something like that. Well, then contingency does have an explanation. Necessity, right, the God of classical theism. And we've covered these arguments in previous episodes, so we can point listeners back to that. I know I'm kind of brushing over a lot of the details here. But once we have that, well, then we can also conclude that because suffering and evil exists and things do have sufficient explanations, there must be a sufficient explanation for suffering and evil from a perfect being, from God, right? Even if we don't know what that is, we can still solidly conclude that there must be a morally sufficient reason for why suffering and evil exists. Now, again, will that be emotionally satisfying to people? I have no idea. But to me, it seems like it forces a real dilemma on the atheist. It's either you try and push the problem of evil, and in order to do that, you're going to ultimately reduce it to a theological mystery, and you're going to wind up with God's existence anyway, because you're going to have to commit to some principle of explicability, or you're going to have to try and be consistent with your brute fact objections that explicability doesn't really matter. And in that case, the problem of evil is going to come down with that, and it's not really a problem anymore at all.
Yeah, I like that argument. It's interesting. So ultimately, then you have to say, well, God does exist, and then ultimately it just kicks back to, well, then there must be an explanation there, even if we don't know what it is.
Because finite things have explanations, right?
Right. Yeah, I like that. It's pretty good. All right, we'll hear the music coming up. We're chatting with Pat Flynn of chroniclesofstrength.com. More to come on the other side of the break. Listen to Hands On Apologetics. Stay tuned, folks.
Hi, this is Jesse Romero from the Terry and Jesse Show, also from Jesus 911. Let's face it, we all need to use the internet, but we need screen accountability. Why? Pornography is a huge problem, especially on the internet. And every time we tap into the internet, we get bombarded with images and temptations that degrade our humanity. So we need Covenant Eyes to block these pornographic sites and advertisements from infiltrating our lives. Covenant Eyes helps us take custody of our eyes and custody of our intellect. So I recommend you go to covenanteyes.com and type in the promo code VMPR to support the network. Protect yourself and your family from the imminent threats on the internet. www.covenanteyes.com, code VMPR, live porn free. Thank you for listening to Virgin Most Powerful Radio. Thank you. God bless you. Keep the faith.
this is Terry Barber. I want to thank you for supporting Virgin Most Powerful Radio. And here's an easy way to support us by going to smile.amazon.com and type in Catholic Resource Center or Virgin Most Powerful Radio. And when you log in your Amazon account and you purchase products, a portion of it will go right back in supporting Virgin Most Powerful Radio. And it doesn't cost you a dime. I want to thank you ahead of time because that supports us year-round. May God bless you and your family. Buying or selling your home or your business property? This is Terry Barber. Real Estate for Life underwrites the Terry and Jesse Show. And they can connect you to one of 900 pro-life real estate agents around the world. And when they receive their referral fee, they will give 80% of it to a pro-life organization. Wow, that's 80%. realestateforlife.org, 877-LIFE-US1.
This is Jesse Romero. You're listening to Hands-On Apologetics with Gary Machuda on Virgin Most Powerful Radio.
And welcome back, everybody. We're chatting with Pat Flynn, and we're talking about the problem of evil and, where exactly does the problem lie? Does it lie with theism or does it lie with atheism? And Pat, you've been putting on a clinic last couple of segments. Lots of very interesting thoughts about that there is this kind of what do I say? Kind of inner incoherence about how atheists argue. They'll use one track for proving God doesn't exist. They'll use a brute fact, but then the whole power behind the problem of evil assumes that there are no brute facts, that there has to be some sort of sufficient cause or reason for things that happen.
Right, and I think we should be a little bit more aggressive on this front. Theists should be. Because I think it's true, right? I think that there's inconsistency among atheists, even very smart atheists, of when they will decide explicability matters. And it's either we're going to be committed to this principle or we're not. Now, I don't think that you can coherently get out of the argument from contingency. I don't think the brute fact objection works at all. What I'm saying, though, is even if you try this objection, it seems to me evidence of clear motivated reasoning or resistance to theism, whatever the psychological reason is, because then you can't just bring back in your commitment to sufficient reasons or explicability when you try to push forth an argument from evil, because you're going to be at least implicitly committed to something like that. And I think trying to set up dilemmas of these sort, I think can be very helpful. Right, because if nothing else, I think the sincere atheist will have to make a decision, right? And that is, okay, I don't want to accept the argument from contingency, but I better stop pushing the problem from evil, right? Or I want to push the problem from evil, but then I need to accept the argument from contingency or other arguments. I think it isn't just the argument from contingency. So that's what I'm trying to do, is expose what I think is a very clear inconsistency of how atheists typically will avoid arguments for God on one hand and try to argue against God on the other hand.
Yeah, the only weakness I can see is that I think for a rank and file atheist that they might not even know, I've worked through the brute fact idea. They might have a kind of general understanding of, Aquinas' ways just fail, and they probably have a misunderstanding of what the ways are. To begin with, like contingency, they probably have a misunderstanding. Right. So, they won't be aware of this kind of, we'll use sufficient reason here, but not here.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think this is somewhat of a limited device, and this is probably something you'll want to use with the atheist who's a little bit more informed, for exactly the reasons you've just described. Not all atheists, and probably most atheists, have not spent to use the word sufficient again, a sufficient amount of time with a lot of these traditional arguments. But there are many who have, right? And this seems to be something that seems a glaring inconsistency. Now, of course, you can just take what I've offered and just realize that this is just one tool in the kit, and you're not always going to apply it. Or you could just explain the situation and say, hey, it seems like in venturing the problem of evil, you feel like explanations are important, right? And maybe you'll just gather that commitment there and be like, oh, okay, if you think explanations are important, then let me show you this argument, right? and then see what they think, right? When you present the argument from contingency and see which ones are stronger. And I think there's a clear asymmetry. I think if you think explanations are important, then you should accept God's existence and realize that suffering and evil exists. And I want to be very important. To explain suffering and evil isn't to explain away suffering and evil. There's a big difference there, right? But either way, it just reduces it. It just brings it down. It's no longer something that is really a threat to theism. But it's still an important question, undoubtedly.
Yeah, I mean, even on the level of emotion, suffering is unbearable if there's no meaning behind it, So although, like you said, it doesn't take suffering off the table, suffering still occurs and you still have to bear it. But it's more bearable if you know that ultimately, there is a reason for the suffering that you're undergoing.
I agree. I think that's where, honestly, just preaching the gospel can be so therapeutic and so beautiful to people. And this happens all the time. Yes, for some people, suffering causes people to question God's existence, but for so many other people, it brings them to God, right? It increases their trust and faith and relationship and commitment to God. And, there's really good. And it's kind of funny because how you address this philosophically of showing why the problem of evil doesn't succeed, in one level that's enough. Okay, that's good. That helps us in one sense. But everybody still wants to know why, right? Like all of us, why God? Why? And that is a legitimate theological question. And that's where things like theodicy come into play. And I would argue that's where Christianity and specifically Catholicism has the most beautiful answers, that it's all bound up in the types of creatures we are and the type of relationship God wants with us, and that and that we can know, at least in a general way, why God allows suffering and evil, even if we can't know in any specific case. And the general way is because it might be the best or only available means that God has given a certain situation to bring about the greatest possible outcome for every single one of us, right? Now, again, that's extremely general, so we can never look to any specific instance like the coronavirus and say, yes, this happened, so this person could do this specifically. Who knows, right? These are the things that we're just not in a good epistemic position to say. But Christianity and theology and theodicy gives us the equipment to say, no, it seems like given the nature of justification and sanctification and human freedom, right, that this may have been the best or only available means that God could facilitate and encourage a loving, saving relationship, not just to himself, but everybody else. Maybe the best or only available means to stop us from enclosing ourselves into a pit of narcissism, of superficiality, of egoism, to break free of that, to increase in compassion, courage, self-sacrifice, love, mercy, radical forgiveness, all these different things. And I think that comes after you realize that the philosophical objections fail, and then you're open. You're emotionally and spiritually open to hearing some of these explanations. And again, I don't think we can prove any of these explanations are true for largely the same reason that we can't prove why God wouldn't have morally sufficient reasons. We just don't have God's perspective, right? But we can show there's a realm of possibilities here, and Christianity has really good, plausible theodicies that many people find really, really quite beautiful, actually, and very attractive.
Yeah, I mean, with the Christian perspective is God demonstrates suffering has meaning and goodness to it in that he became man. He assumed our human nature and underwent suffering and death, the worst of the evils, in order to bring about a greater good. So in a sense, it's almost like he demonstrates it to be true in the incarnation.
That's a great way of putting it, right? Like he literally gave us the proof example, if you will, right? So what happened? Literally, arguably, the worst thing that could ever happen happened. Literal deicide, right? Like we killed God, and like what happened to Christ? He was tortured. He was humiliated in front of his mom. He was shamed. He was speared, and he was killed. He was brutally executed, and like all the worst elements of human sin were poured onto him. And what happened? God swallowed all of that up and brought about our eternal salvation, right? Yeah. So from like the worst possible thing, somehow comes the best possible thing. And there's a whole bunch of mystery to that, but I think there's so much content there in the resurrection to show like, wow, if God could do that much good with that much bad, and it doesn't mean that God wanted that bad to happen, right? But for whatever reason it did happen, but God could still bring that much good out of it, then I think we can all have a very reasonable hope that God could do that for any amount of suffering or evil in the world.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, so, yeah, beautiful. I mean, I love the way that your reasoning works, and ultimately we end up with, it being a theological question. Of course, like you said, theism and specifically Catholicism has a really great explanation for the problem of evil. Anything you want to touch on before we start talking about your website?
Now, I just want to emphasize again that my claim is a strong one, but it seems right to me that in order to even get the problem of evil off the ground, you're going to need certain assumptions. And those assumptions only work given a prior commitment to theism. That's what it ultimately comes down to. Whether those assumptions have to deal with contingency, consciousness, reasoning, rationality, all of which is bound in with the problem of evil. And of course, an objective moral realm. That's a huge one as well. You just need to assume all those things to even make sense of the problem of evil. And then I'm just trying to add another layer to that, which is this idea of some commitment to a principle of explicability to kind of make the dilemma even stronger. And once I think that's appreciated, either the atheist will have to drop the problem of evil or accept the existence of God. And either of those seems like progress to me.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think that is the engine in which the problem of evil runs, is this explicability aspect. But anyway, I wanted to take a couple of minutes to kind of inform listeners, especially those who aren't familiar with your work. Tell us a little bit about chroniclesofstrength.com.
Sure. Yeah, that's my website, and it's connected with my podcast, The Pat Flynn Show. So I've got kind of an eclectic background. I went to school for economics and then philosophy. But when I was in college paying the bills, I was personal training people. I was just getting into fitness, getting certifications, and I started a blog about all kinds of stuff, but I talked a lot about fitness. And one thing, leads to another. I start getting a following. I got a number of book deals, and that just becomes my professional career, Right. And so, I've always been kind of an online content producer and a writer professionally. But fortunately, it's also allowed me to expand into other areas. So on my podcast, The Pat Flynn Show, I have a lot of fitness content, but I also have two segments. I have Philosophy Friday, where we have conversations very much like this. And then I have Sunday School, which focuses more on Catholic theology. And of course, you've been a guest before. I'm actually going to soon be airing the recent conversation we had on why Catholic Bibles are bigger.
Yeah.
So if nothing else, people can get more of our interaction over there. But if they're interested in, general fitness content, I do a lot of stuff with kettlebells. Then yeah, come check it out. chroniclesofstrength.com.
Absolutely. And yeah, you're kind of partnering with Eric Robinson, who was on the show yesterday.
That's right. Yeah. So Eric and I were connected originally through, we went to the same college for grad school, and we had a few exchanges before, and we just hit it off, and we're like, hey, why don't we just start co-hosting a few episodes? We've been having an absolute blast. So
yeah, that's awesome. You guys make a great pair. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Gary. Really enjoyed it.
All right, that's Pat Flynn of chroniclesofstrength.com. Check it out, folks. Man, the hour just flies. It's been so much fun. I hope you enjoyed the program. Coming up next, High Impact Catholic Talk coming at you with the Terry and Jesse Show. And yes, it is time for me to shut down the Midwest Command Center here, turn off the dojo lights. But nevertheless, God willing, we will be back tomorrow. You're listening all Hands on Apologetics. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
In the 1990s, I lived and worked in Hollywood. But when my wife Betty's mom took ill, we relocated to Orange County. And it was during this time in our lives that I converted to Catholicism. Once my eyes were opened to the truth, I couldn't learn enough about the faith. But I had less free time than ever, especially with a long commute. That's when I discovered the real value of Catholic audio. listening to cassette tapes transformed by daily commute into a miniature retreat. And that's the beauty of Virgin Most Powerful Radio today. Since the podcasts are archived, you can listen anytime on our smartphone app. I know how listening to Catholic audio can bring you closer to Christ and His Church. So I encourage you to visit the App Store or go to vmpr.org and download the app today. It just might change your life. I'm Matthew Arnold for Virgin Most Powerful Radio.